Hello, beautiful salamander family. Welcome back to episode 2 of the Regen Beacon. First, thank you to everyone who listened to last week's episode and everyone who sent back kind words of encouragement and constructive feedback. I've got more updates and housekeeping notes to share at the end of the episode, but for now, let's just jump right into it. Episode 2, A Bucketful of Bluegills. I was born a very lucky child. I was born into a peaceful place, in a time of plenty, to loving parents. My parents both worked full-time, but made time to play with my siblings and I. We went on bike rides and walks together, and they took me to my soccer games and to friends' houses. My parents were very involved in my childhood, and raised me very involved in activities, church choir, plays, all different kinds of sports, and Boy Scouts among them. I really enjoyed being a Boy Scout. I have fond memories of building my Pinewood Derby cars with my dad, an activity we undertook in the off-limits unfinished room in our basement. We would use the basement bandsaw to streamline the wooden rectangle into something approximating the body shape of a Formula One car. Then we'd use the table saw to notch 2 slits into the base for the wheel axles, followed by the drill press to create cylindrical holes for the weights we glued into the car body. With the body done, we would then paint the car. A metallic red color we chose one year comes to mind. When we were just about done, we would squeeze graphite powder out of a tube onto the axle before sliding on the black plastic wheels, giving them a quick quality control spin to watch them spin effortlessly for what seemed like eternity. Like all good race cars, we added decals, stripes, and flames to really add some style. We wouldn't always, or even usually, reach the bottom of the 5-lane sigmoidal racetrack first, but we would cross the finish line in style. We did a lot of things I enjoyed in Boy Scouts. We sold popcorn and winter wreaths, for which I was richly rewarded for my hours of entrepreneurship, not with a paycheck, but with pocket knives and baseballs. We went to weekly meetings decked out in our neat little button-down khaki shirts with sewn-on rank insignia, collars adorned with neckerchiefs. Most important of all to my Boy Scout experience was camping. We went camping as a troop all year round. In the fall, we set up camp, and at night, we would commando through the trees and tall grass prairies in an epic game of capture the flag. In the winter, we would do survival camping, making rudimentary shelters with tarps, feeling super accomplished with ourselves while nestled in our modern synthetic winter sleeping bags. But in the summertime, we would go to the main event, a week-long Boy Scout extravaganza at Boy Scout camp. There are about 100 Boy Scout camps around the country. The one we went to was Camp Matigua. Camp Matigua is located in the Des Moines River Valley, near Ames. It's really close to my favorite state park in Iowa, Ledges State Park. In my opinion, this is one of the nicest parts of the state, with hills and ravines that are too steep to farm corn and soybeans in, which means there's still bountiful endemic biology growing in profusion there. The karst topography hosts hillsides full of red oak and shagbark hickories. The ravines are moist and cool, with mosses and several species of ferns sprouting from the exposed limestone. It's an ecology where I see dancing damselflies, where I first found my favorite arthropod, Narcissus americanus, the giant North American millipede, a purple behemoth 4 inches long, roundly segmented like a Smarties candy or high-speed train, with hundreds, or 1,000 if the name is to be believed, tiny red legs that move in a synchronized undulating motion. They don't bite, they move really slowly. If you pick them up, they usually poop on you, so that's not their best feature, but they're super cute. I give them a 10 out of 10 for Iowa bugs. And importantly, you only find them in healthy forests. They are veritable salamanders of the insect world. Camp Matigua had millipedes and more. I loved camp, a land rich with traditions and rituals that usually involved co-opting early 20th century impressions of idealized Native American culture and lighting things on fire, a perennial Boy Scout pastime. A place centered on softly militarized boyhood, making friends, overcoming mild adversity in the elements and on high ropes courses. A place where we dined and sang camp songs in the mess halls, and slept in thick green canvas tents, not dissimilar to British colonial expeditionaries. At Boy Scout camp, we earned endless merit badges, learning tangible skills and adorning our sashes with fabric tokens of our expertise and moral superiority. We fired arrows at hay bales, bullets at clay pigeons, rappelled off the highest of wooden towers, cooked cobblers in Dutch ovens, and wandered around fields with maps and compasses to master the lost art of orienteering, which, with the advent of GPS, I think is even more of a lost art than even in my childhood. Camp was a special place in time where I also got to spend with my dad and brothers. And camp was a place with water activities. Camp Motigua had a roughly football-sized half-moon pond, a giant watery kidney bean with warm, murky water. But not dirty, at least by Iowa standards. While paddling around on its surface with my fellow intrepid troopmates, I vividly recall seeing a water snake swimming along the surface before it dove under the water. A moment later, our instructor gave us the command to intentionally capsize our canoe into the water as a final test before we received the canoeing merit badge. And so, I joined my new snake friend in the murky wetness, curling my toes together lest they be mistaken for a snack on my way back to shore. At Boy Scout camp, we lived by the Scout law. I guess technically a Scout must always live by the Scout law, but definitely at Boy Scout camp. We would raise our hand at a 90-degree angle, hold our pinky down with our thumb, and the other 3 fingers pointed to the sky, and repeat, "A Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent." As an adult, these values still seem pretty good to me. I might personally leave out obedient and put in fair or reasonable, as I've never been one for hierarchy and authority by fiat, but pretty good values nonetheless. I give them a 9.09 repeated out of 10, which is 10 out of 11 on a 10-point scale. I bring up my childhood and Boy Scout camp because I've had a specific memory from the Half Moon Pond floating around in my head recently. One summer, my troopmates and I were taken to go fishing for bluegills in the watery oasis. Nothing fancy. We were handed simple flexible rods with low tackle fishing line and the most basic clip art version of a fishhook you could imagine. For bait, there was a Tupperware of sweet corn kernels, and that was enough. That year, for whatever reason, the pond was teeming with bluegills. We'd been given an important mission by our guide, an older Boy Scout guiding us with his leadership and wisdom. There were too many bluegills in the pond, we were told. If we did nothing, they would soon starve. Our mission was to catch as many bluegills as we could and to put them in a bucket. When we were finished, we would bring the bluegills to a different pond, a pond without so many bluegills, and would set them free to live out their fishy lives. And so, hearts aflame in our sacred quest to save our aquatic brethren, we cast our lines into the water, and literally, without fail, we caught bluegills with every cast, usually in about 10 seconds. It was like shooting fish in a barrel, but honestly, that might have been less efficient than what we were doing. Cast out the line, feel the fish bite, reel the fish in, lift the fish out of water, remove the hook, toss fish in bucket, and repeat. With a dozen Boy Scouts working in chaotic synchrony, we soon filled the bucket until fins stuck out. When our time was up, the boys of my troop started heading back to the mess hall. On this occasion, my dad was with us and stayed back to help the older scout tidy up the equipment. I lingered with them, absent-mindedly wandering the reeds and prehistoric-seeming horsetail plants, plucking the verdant tubes here and there, pulling them apart into their individual segments. When my dad and the older scout were finished up and we were about to leave the pond to head back, I saw the older scout, my leader, brethren of the Scout Law, take the bucket of bluegills, and rather than walk it over to a different pond, tossed my finned friends onto the grass with careless ease. I could only stare in horror. My dad saw me see this, and saw this travesty occurring in plain sight, and didn't rush over to save the little fish, but instead offered me a knowing, sympathetic look. He knew I felt betrayed, that I had been betrayed, even if the adults knew all along there was no other pond in waiting. These fish had always been destined to be raccoon food. Looking back, this was obviously a relatively small trauma, at least for me. I'm sure the bluegills saw things differently. But I do remember it. I remember the feeling of betrayal and the shame for my unwitting complicity in the act against animals. I became a vegetarian at age 5 of my own free will. At the time of this story, I was really against hurting animals. If I'd been given the full knowledge of our activity and choice to participate, I may well have still caught the fish, for the greater good of the pond. But I was not given an informed choice. In my own tiny child way, I was betrayed by that scout. A scout is first and foremost trustworthy, and I had been led by an untrustworthy scout. That scout violated their sacred vow and violated their internal consistency. No matter how good one's values, one's system of ethics, we must actually follow through with what we believe. If we don't, we cause harm. In this case, to a bucket full of bluegills, and my tiny Boy Scout innocence. And now, a word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by a bucket full of bluegills. A bucket full of bluegills. We've got so many bluegills in this bucket. We've got small ones, medium small ones. They don't really get that big, so they're all small to medium sized. But we have way too many. All bluegills must go, like soon. If you don't want them, we're gonna throw them in the grass. Get your bucket full of bluegills today. This episode has also been brought to you by the princess of my house, Princess Ballerina, or as her most loyal subjects call her, PB. Princess Ballerina is a true patron of the arts, kneading her biscuits daily to support this podcast. You can find Princess Ballerina gracing the laps of all in the house when Queen Anna is gone, but when the Queen is home, you will pretty much only find her in her lap. Princess Ballerina, nobly named by a niece, a cat more regal you will not find. Back from our break. I find it easier to live in a world with immoral people or amoral people doing bad things than I do with otherwise decent people doing bad things. I encountered a good example of this recently as I was walking back to the parking lot after work one day, the first and favorite leg of my long commute home. On this walk, I had on my oversized headphones as per usual, bopping along the paved path between the architecturally eclectic but collectively majestic buildings of the academic metropolis, listening to Cracker Island by the Gorillaz, an album that I'm confident will be my most played of the year on my Spotify recap. I moved my body through space and time, from the bustle of campus, past the first truly majestic tulip poplar tree I ever met, across the pedestrian bridge where I stood above a river of cars below me. Just over the bridge, I paused to grab a handful of viburnum fruit from the bushes currently laden with the dark purple drupes. The plump, olive pit-sized fruit did little to fill my stomach, their flesh being little more than a paper-thin wrapper around a strong, flat seed. But they filled my mouth with a purple flavor as deep as the ocean, a delightful, velvety caramel, earthy raisin paste. A fruit not yet particularly practical for mass consumption, but promising for processing and selective breeding into the future. Tongue and teeth still dancing with flesh and pits, I continued along the sidewalk past the viburnum bushes, under the canopy of the outer edge of a proud patch of oak that cascade down the north face of a backyard hill. I love those trees, remnants of a forest that survived felling, even as the city flowed around them like lava, leaving not obsidian, but cement where meadow once grew. I love that there aren't only one or two proud trees, but at least 20, several feet in diameter at chest height, 70 or more feet in the air. In the sky, their canopy nearly closes, gaps here and there where their oak kin have succumbed to the passage of time. But in their place, new oaks reaching to join the tapestry of branches. The oaks capture enough of the sun that the hostas and other shade-loving herbaceous perennials grow, but the homeowners don't even bother with grass. In the fall, the oaks covered the ground with a thick layer of leaf litter, a nourishing blanket protecting the soil from the extremes of winter, holding in moisture, and providing shelter and food to a diverse community of life. By spring, it will have vanished, consumed by fungi and pulverized into powder, and life will burst through it anew. I continued down the hill, across the street towards the line of sycamore trees, dodging cars in an easy but ever-present game of Frogger I contend with on a bi-daily ritual. As I walked the final stretch of my journey, almost to the line of baldy cypress trees, I heard the cacophonous roar of an engine, a roar that signaled not the stock standard rumblings of your average car, but intentionality, a modification to be heard. It was not only the ferocity of the roar, but the rhythm, the driver repeatedly revving the V overkill engine. I turned to see the source of the ruckus, and, as expected, saw a jacked-up red truck, a pavement princess with a bad attitude. With all the dinosaur juice they had just wasted, they had achieved the blazing speed of like 15 miles per hour, as they were behind a nondescript sedan with the driver driving like a normal person, accelerating at a reasonable pace after a stop sign. I'm a calm person by nature. If I had been wearing a heart monitor, I don't think you would have even seen a discernible increase in my blood pressure. However, out of principle, I turned and flipped off the driver, in acknowledgement that I found their behavior distasteful. As I offered my gesture of disfavor to the driver, I saw a 2-foot square LED panel affixed to the back window of the truck. On it were 2 words illuminated in bright white lights, reading, "Locally hated." Fair enough. I wasn't embarrassed at my momentary lapse of decorum, at my single-finger salute, but I was a little disappointed that I had given them the attention they were craving. I had just fed a real-life troll. This person was driving like a douchebag, but they knew they were driving like a douchebag. They had warped their persona around the goal of getting negative attention of their neighbors, and they were acting in accordance of those values. In a way, by declaring themselves to be locally hated, it did decrease my anger towards them. The driver was an asshole, but he was an internally consistent asshole. I have a harder time with decent people, with moral compasses that I understand and share many parts of, that act in ways that seem hypocritical. Right now, there are no people that I am struggling with more than MAGA Christians. I do not share the same exact type of Christian faith as most adherents. I do not take the Bible as literal truth, and mentally can't until I'm shown a whale that a man can live inside of for 40 days, and emerge as anything other than feces or ambergris. I find the pain and abject suffering in the world irreconcilable with an all-loving and all-powerful God. There is literally nothing that my daughter could do that would make me want to condemn her to eternal suffering, and I just don't believe a God would design a universe underpinned by such a threat. But I am a Christian. I do find deep truth in the Bible. I was raised in the church. The church is indelibly marked across my heart. I'm a follower of the wisdom and teachings of Jesus. I know the stories of old, the good word brought by Jesus, his teachings and sermons and parables. Not as well as some, but better than most. I may not believe in the same way that you do, but I live the words. I offer my pennies of love to those around me far more than the sanctimonious hordes jiggling their golden coins in piety at the altar of prosperity doctrine. At the end of days, should I stand in judgment, I will stand tall to be judged by my actions and good deeds. I am so damn tired of the performative piety of people that metaphorically defecate on the weakest in society, in the name of a man who stood with the outcasts, who rejected the rich and powerful, who lived a life of love. It is said that even the devil can quote scripture, but let's take the plain text of a foundational directive from Jesus, given in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, verses 35 through 40. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. For I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did I see you hungry, and feed you, or thirsty, and give you something to drink? When did I see you a stranger, and invite you in, or needing clothes, and clothe you? When did we see you sick, or in prison, and go to visit you? And the king will reply, Truly I tell you, whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. If you, as a follower of Jesus Christ, voted for Donald Trump, a compulsive liar, wrathful, cruel by instinct, a narcissist, lover of only himself, certainly not to his wives, to whom he is a twice-divorced habitual adulterer, Donald Trump, a man who mocks the physically weak and vilifies the most vulnerable among us, who openly forces himself upon women, then I reject your judgment. He is a man who uses the Bible as a prop, as a tool to control those eager to be controlled. He sells Bibles for nothing more than personal enrichment. Like the Pharisees, Jesus would cast him down from the temple. In his pursuit of personal power, he has corrupted the church, sat on his golden toilet to turn followers into idolaters, believers sincere of heart to atheists. That so many can call themselves Christians and can support a man who is, as an individual and as a leader, as antithetical to the teachings of Jesus will never not reek with the stench of hypocrisy to me. I personally am in loving community with a person for whom Jesus is purportedly their soul-guided light, who openly acknowledges that Donald J. Trump may well be the literal Antichrist, but then pulled the proverbial lever for him. The mental gymnastics involved in that calculation will never make sense to me. Let's put it this way. If you're more offended by the existence of gay and trans people, more offended by people saying happy holidays than the relentless craven commercialization of your Savior's birth, than you are, say, of the policy of ripping peaceful, undocumented families apart and shoving them in cages, then I do not think you are a follower of Jesus. So many temples around this country have been corrupted. What was written as, "For it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven," is now, "For your riches are a reflection of your righteousness and worthiness of God's love. Make sure you put your check in the mail so I can buy my second private jet." If you think I'm taking cheap shots here, Google the frocked demon Kenneth Copeland, who literally asked his followers to increase their donations to his church so that he could buy a second private jet. Call me traditional, but I don't think pastors should have private jets. If you do believe you follow the words of Jesus and find there is a chasm between the love of Jesus and the actions you are taking, there's good news. Yours, ours, is a tradition of radical love and forgiveness. If I were you, I would fall to the ground, prostrate before thy God and atone, fervently seeking forgiveness for straying so far from Jesus' very explicit teachings of love. And then I would go to your congregations and do the hard work of making change. You are not irredeemable. You can still fight for your neighbors to authentically and internally consistently live the radical love of Jesus. If you don't follow the words of Jesus or any other religious tradition of love and tolerance, if you are, say, a secular white nationalist zealot listening to this podcast and you just admit that you're filled with hate and you want to inflict pain on communities different than you, then I say, hello, Stephen Miller. How did you find this podcast? I do not like you. You're not invited into my big tent, but at least my judgment falls from you, for you are an internally consistent, if terrible, human being. Christians are far from the only hypocrites in our society or in our world. Abroad, where the cultural majorities are different, you see the same story with different actors. Buddhists committing genocide against the Rohingya Muslims, Jews creating an apartheid state and inflicting wanton violence against those with whom they have legitimate grievance, but on whom the preponderance of violence has been vastly disproportionately applied. You have Shia and Sunni Muslims committing violence against each other and other communities. Hypocrisy and immorality are by no means unique to Christianity, or even to the religious, with many authoritarian regimes with secular ideology subjugating and denying liberty to their citizens. I focus here on the teachings of Jesus and Christianity because it is the religious tradition I am most familiar with, and it is the religious tradition of the vast majority of power brokers in our society. A Christian church that has strayed from its moral compass is far more dangerous in our society than, say, a comparably corrupt Sikh movement. I find the disconnect between the values expressed and the values enacted by these so-called Christians to be galling. When Donald Trump is sworn in, he will have his hand upon a Bible, and I, for one, will judge him as such. And now, a word from our sponsors. I'm getting a memo from our producers. Let me see here. It appears that the sponsors have dropped their sponsorship for the next segment due to violations of the family-friendly policy rider. I don't understand what I'm saying. I'm against families being ripped apart and put in cages. Oh, I see. I haven't had a chance to read the new 40th edition of the 1984 Doublespeak Manual. Yes, that makes more sense. I was too friendly to families. Well, my apologies. It's hard to keep up with the times. What else is on here? I see that the Homeland Security nominee Kristi Noem has updated the animal care section to taking care of animals. See cricket and goat. What else? I see the DOJ director nominee Matt Gaetz has changed the Department of Justice acronym to now stand for Dominion Over Juveniles. Very troubling, but that's what the manual says. Okay, well, I'm not sure about these changes, but I guess that's enough for today. It appears that we don't have any sponsors for this segment, so let's jump to this week's Minute of Abstract Sound, brought to you by Gustavo Marron. This Minute of Abstract Sound is called A Man Crunching Through Leaves to Leave a Microphone in the Windy Woods. I hope you enjoy. And that was our Minute of Abstract Sound. Bien hecho, Gustavo. Gracias para los sonidos. In this last segment, let's refer back to our foundational mission of making more life than death. I think that gardening, done on a massive scale as to be described as regenerative agriculture, is a powerful tool towards realizing this vision. Every gardener can make a difference, and a society of gardeners can restore the world. Which begs the question, If you're trying to make gardeners, to empower people, where do you start? When you picture the first step in becoming a gardener, what do you picture? Something active? Perhaps grabbing a trowel and some seeds and going full squirrel mode? I appreciate the impulse, and if you want to get some herbs in a pot or a little section of lawn growing some tomatoes, I say more power to you. But to come into your own as a gardener, to learn the rhythms of the world and learn to embrace your role as a keystone human in the symphony of nature, you must first learn to see the world through the eyes of a gardener. Let me give you some examples. Walk outside and feel the air. What temperature is it? What was the temperature yesterday? What was the temperature 3 months ago and 3 months from now? How oppressive does the heat get in your summers? How humid? How frigid does your world become in winter? From which direction do the icy winds originate? How fiercely do they blow? How does the flow of your landscape vary with hills and valleys, the walls of buildings and trees? How does this influence the weather in the landscape, making a mosaic of zones of relative warmth or cold? Where does the frost form first? Where does the snow linger longest? When it rains, where do the puddles form? Where does it flow when the ground saturates? Does it move slowly over the surface of the ground or rage into rivers? When it flows, does the water stay clear or does it become cloudy with silt? After a rain, look at the leaves and silt particles. See where they settle. Where do they leave a rim like coffee in an empty cup? Where does the sun dance in the morning? Where does the sun bathe in full intensity in the light of day? Where does it linger in the afternoon and evening? How does this dance of radiant radiation change throughout the year? How does the ground feel beneath your feet? Is it spongy and rich? Or is it hard and compacted? Can you stick your finger into the earth, pushing in knuckle after knuckle? Or does it resist you like a brick wall? Now use a trowel and liberate a handful of soil. Tumble it between your fingers. Does it flow like grains of sand or clump together? If you moisten it and roll it into a coil, how far does it extend before it breaks? Does it smell like a forest after a rain, or does it have no smell at all? Do you see hyphae and roots, worms, mites, beetles? Or do you see only rock and clay, devoid of living community? Do this again and again throughout your landscape. What differences do you see? Learn to recognize the plants of your community. Which are indigenous to the land? Which are novel? Which are the first to break bud in spring? Which hold onto their leaves the longest in fall? Which flowers do the bees visit? Which leaves are the favorites of rabbits and deer? Which berries do the birds seek out? Where do the butterflies dance? Find the land near you where the greatest diversity and abundance of life lives. That is to say, go to nature, but understand that nature is a man-made concept. Everywhere is somewhere. We are animals, and we live in the world like all other animals. These sacred lands, still rich with life, are the greatest teachers of all. Seek them out. Feast your senses in the forests and meadows. Fill your soul and inform your worldview. Learn to see loss and absence. What was where you stand a year ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, 10 million years ago? Don't grieve the dinosaurs long extinct, but do grieve the missing mammoths and the bygone bison. Grieve the forests felled and the prairies tilled under, the marshes drained, the world made flat, dry, and homogeneous. If we learn to see the world that is, we can begin to understand the world that was and the world that can be. Observe deeply. Bring your full mindfulness to the rhythms around you. In this observation, you will unlock the key to becoming a gardener and starting on the road of making more life than death. Thank you again for joining me in this week's episode. This podcast is now available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If there is a podcast service that you use that I have not yet listed this podcast, please let me know and I will work on that. I have also made an email for this show, theregenbeacon@gmail.com. Please send me any thoughts you have or suggestions for future themes. I really appreciate all the feedback. If you like the show, please take the time to give a review and rating. If you have anyone in your life that might be interested, please consider sharing the show with them so that we can grow our big tent community and continue on this journey together. And with that, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week.